Yeah.
What you think about that?
He didn't do it.
Nobody saw this twist coming. Charleston White just flipped the script on a case that had nearly destroyed a young artist's career. In a world where silence often feels safer, Charleston spoke in sharp, unapologetic words, declaring David innocent and backing it up with a revelation so unexpected it forced everyone to stop and rethink what they thought they knew. The boldness of his claim and the timing of it sent shockwaves through an already electrified conversation. The story began with headlines no one could ignore. A dismembered body reportedly discovered inside a Tesla registered to David, a rising 20-year-old music star whose career was on a steep climb. Within hours, the internet was ablaze. Comment sections filled with wild theories. Twitter threads dissected his every lyric, and some even suggested his songs were cryptic confessions. The pressure was immediate and brutal. Sponsors distanced themselves, brands dropped him, and fans who once cheered were suddenly unsure of what to believe. And then, right in the middle of the noise, Charleston White stepped into the storm. Known for being brash, polarizing and unfiltered, he became the one voice willing to go against the tide. Charleston didn't just defend David, he went further, arguing that the absence of an arrest spoke louder than any headline, framing it as the strongest proof that David was being wrongfully vilified. His words, sharp as a blade, landed like a challenge to both the media and the public, daring them to question their own rush to judgment. Now, the spotlight has shifted yet again, with Charleston's declaration and his so-called evidence stirring fresh debate. The case feels far from settled. The question lingering is simple but powerful. Did Charleston just reveal a truth that clears David, or ignite a controversy that's only just beginning?
Yeah.
What you think about that?
He didn't do it.
Fuck out of here. All the evidence that's out there.
It wasn't just a passing remark. Charleston made sure no one mistook his words for casual chatter. He doubled down, this time with logic that he believed was impossible to ignore. Speaking with the fire he's known for, Charleston argued that in America, especially for young black men, arrests often come with little more than suspicion. He reminded his audience that countless lives have been upended over flimsy evidence, with people dragged into jail cells just to hold them while cases were still thin. And yet in David's situation, despite the gravity of the accusations and the media frenzy, no charges had been filed. To Charleston, that absence spoke volumes. He insisted this wasn't about prosecutors quietly building a stronger case in the shadows. No, to him, it meant there wasn't a case at all. And to drive his point home, he reached for one of his trademark analogies, the kind that lands like a punch in the gut, rough, unpolished, and deliberately uncomfortable. His words weren't meant to soothe, they were meant to jolt listeners awake, to force them into questioning whether David had been prematurely condemned by the court of public opinion. And in doing so, Charleston made his defense not just an argument, but a challenge to the very system itself.
If they find a dead body in me and your car, and this is our car, do you think they'll let me and you stay out like long? They got out. So think about this.
That raw comparison cut straight to Charleston's larger point. In his eyes, if this were an everyday person, someone without fame, without cameras, without lawyers, they'd already be behind bars the moment a body was linked to them. But David, he was still on stage, still touring, still walking freely in the public eye. To Charleston, that single fact carried more weight than any rumor swirling online. It wasn't silence from law enforcement, he argued. It was proof of absence, proof that the case simply didn't hold. But Charleston didn't stop there. He turned his attention to the darker speculation flooding social media. Whispers that David had been involved with an underage girl, tied in some way to her brutal death. Every corner of the internet seemed to latch onto something. Matching tattoos that fans swore were clues, leaked photos circulating like wildfire, and lyrics pulled apart line by line as if they were secret confessions. The narrative seemed airtight to those already convinced. Yet Charleston brushed it aside. To him, it was all too clean, too cinematic, too perfect of a setup. He framed it as a story designed to condemn rather than reveal the truth, daring his audience to question whether they were being fed a tragedy or a trap.
So think about this. If they got all this information on him dating a minor, an underage kid, and she looked like a white girl, mixed girl, what they let just stay free like this?
The way Charleston laid it out, the story simply didn't make sense. A young black artist, allegedly tied to a missing 15-year-old girl, with whispers of physical evidence linking him to her death, and yet no detainment, no charges, not even a temporary hold. To Charleston, that silence from law enforcement wasn't a mistake. It was the clearest sign that David might not be the villain the world had already decided he was. And in true Charleston fashion, he didn't pull punches. He pointed to the brutality of the crime itself, a body found dismembered, hidden with chilling precision. That level of planning, that kind of cruelty, he argued, didn't fit with the image of David people thought they knew. Charleston pushed his audience to sit with the uncomfortable possibility. Could this have been a setup? Could someone else entirely have orchestrated the crime while letting the rising star take the fall? They got all this evidence to say he did it. They say he butchered the body. Charleston pressed. And still, no arrest. Those words echoed across X, Instagram, YouTube, sparking an uproar. Some called him reckless, defending the indefensible, pointing out that a teenager's remains had been discovered in David's own car. Others saw Charleston as the only one daring to voice what they'd been whispering privately. Maybe the official story was too neat, too easy. And Charleston didn't treat this like just another hot take to stir controversy. He lingered on it, hammering the point again and again, determined to make his audience feel the weight of the inconsistency. For him, the lack of charges wasn't just suspicious, it made the narrative itself impossible to swallow. To drive it home, he pulled a chilling comparison, reminding his viewers of one of the most infamous trials in modern American history, the O.J. Simpson case, where fame, race, and media frenzy collided in a way that still divides opinion decades later. And just like that, Charleston placed David's story in the same category, a case where the truth might not be as simple as it seems.
So you mean to tell me O.J. was found with a bloody glove, he was arrested immediately? Immediately, with all the circumstantial evidence they found on O.J., they placed it. So you mean to tell me they got all of this on this and he still get to move freely amongst America?
By invoking O.J., Charleston wasn't just drawing a parallel, he was pointing a finger at what he saw as the double standard in America's justice system. He reminded his audience that history is filled with cases where men, particularly black men, were thrown behind bars on the thinnest scraps of circumstantial evidence. If police could do that so easily, Charleston asked, then why hadn't they done the same with David, who was supposedly surrounded by stronger, more damning evidence? That contradiction, to him, was the crack in the story no one wanted to look at too closely. But Charleston didn't stop at pointing out hypocrisy. He went further, leaning into darker territory, spinning out scenarios that unsettled even his own viewers. He floated the idea that maybe someone else entirely was behind the crime, someone calculated enough to make David look guilty while staying hidden in the shadows. These weren't comfortable possibilities, and Charleston knew it. That was the point. His insistence on painting alternative pictures, however raw, made it clear just how deeply he doubted the official narrative. And with each scenario he described, the story surrounding David grew murkier, forcing the public to confront an uneasy truth. Maybe everything they thought they knew about this case was built on quicksand.
So I'm saying, let me think outside the box. Maybe his mama done it. Maybe her mama done it and set him up. Maybe one of them racist uncles or cousins don't like her. Maybe the other boyfriend done it. Maybe the pimp who was sex trafficking her for the last year when she ran away done it.
These weren't polished courtroom statements carefully tailored for a jury. They were raw, unfiltered speculations hurled into the public square like grenades. And that, ironically, was why Charleston's words traveled so far. He wasn't bound by legal jargon or the slow grind of procedure. He spoke in a way that ordinary people understood. Blunt, messy, emotional. Every sentence hit with the weight of frustration, the conviction of someone who refused to accept the official story at face value. In his telling, the case against David didn't just feel weak, it felt like it had been built on smoke and mirrors. Charleston even mocked some of the so-called proof that had captivated the internet. At the center of it was a photo that went viral. David and the 15-year-old victim both had the same Shay tattoo inked on their index fingers. Fans took it as undeniable evidence of intimacy, as if it sealed the connection between them. But Charleston wasn't buying it. To him, a tattoo wasn't proof of a secret relationship. It was a flimsy coincidence being blown up into a headline too convenient to question. And then came the line that ignited firestorms across social media. In the middle of defending David, Charleston shifted his criticism toward the girl herself. His language was rough, cutting, and for many, deeply offensive. But underneath the shock value, his words revealed the core of his belief, that David was being used as a scapegoat, an easy villain for a crime that might not be his to own. It was a stance that split the internet wide open, sparking fury in some, uneasy agreement in others, and ensuring that Charleston's defense would be remembered as one of the most controversial takes in the entire saga.
And I know they said, man, he wrong for calling her a little hoe, but she was. Little girl don't run away from home, little hoes and little...
That statement wasn't just harsh, it detonated like a bombshell. Overnight, critics accused Charleston of crossing the line, of blaming the victim and excusing David by turning his fire on a girl who could no longer speak for herself. But Charleston's defenders pushed back, insisting that he wasn't excusing anything. Instead, they argued he was forcing people to step outside the headlines and ask whether the story being spun around David was too one-sided to be trusted. And in Charleston's world, asking uncomfortable questions was always better than swallowing a simple answer. He kept circling back to the same core argument, race. To him, it wasn't just a detail, it was the foundation of everything. They don't let black men get away with these kinds of crimes, not in America. That one line ricocheted across social media, echoed in debates, stitched into TikToks, reposted on X. For Charleston, this was the ultimate logic. If David truly had committed something this horrific, he would already be behind bars. The fact that he wasn't, that he was still free, still moving through the world as an uncharged man, meant there had to be something deeper at play. And that's where Charleston stood out. While others obsessed over tattoos, lyrics, and leaked photos, he was tearing apart the entire frame of the case. He wasn't just questioning details, he was dismantling the narrative piece by piece and daring anyone to prove him wrong. His words carried the conviction of someone who had spent a lifetime studying injustice, living inside it, and refusing to let it be ignored. To him, this wasn't just about one rapper, it was about a system that had never gone easy on young black men suddenly choosing to play cautious in a case that looked tailor-made for a fast conviction. Charleston's defense was paradoxical in its very design. He wasn't denying the existence of evidence, the Tesla, the tattoos, the unsettling lyrics, the rumors of a minor. He was saying there was too much evidence, so much that the very weight of it, paired with the lack of an arrest, made the entire story unbelievable. If David were truly guilty, Charleston argued, the system wouldn't hesitate. The fact that it did was its own contradiction. And so he pushed further, painting what-ifs that unsettled audiences. What if this wasn't David's crime at all? What if the case was a carefully orchestrated setup, built to look airtight, but riddled with holes? Those what-ifs turned Charleston's defense into a viral spectacle. For some, he was reckless, irresponsible, defending the indefensible. For others, he was finally saying aloud what they'd quietly suspected, that the official story didn't add up. Charleston thrived in that chaos. He brought every argument back to a single truth. David was still free. And to him, the only possible reason was simple, because David didn't do it. It was a hill Charleston was willing to die on, knowing full well the backlash it would ignite. People accused him of minimizing the death of a child, of excusing behavior that should never be excused. But Charleston had never been afraid of backlash. If anything, he fed off it. He doubled down, telling audiences to remember every case where young black men were dragged into courtrooms over rumors, arrested on suspicion, locked away on maybe and probably. Now here was a case stacked with DNA, cars, tattoos, songs, and headlines, and still no arrest. To Charleston White, that wasn't coincidence, that was innocence, and millions online couldn't help but pause, replay his words, and wonder if just maybe he had a point. But Charleston's defense of David didn't explode into the spotlight by accident. To understand why his voice could ignite millions of comments, why his take could dominate feeds and fuel endless debate, you have to understand the man himself. Because Charleston White isn't just another loud commentator with a microphone. He is a man built on controversy, a figure whose life is a jagged mix of crime, redemption, hypocrisy, and spectacle. Born in 1977 in Texas, Charleston's life veered off course before it had even begun. By 14, he was already entangled in violence, involved in a fatal altercation outside a Foot Locker store that left one man dead, tried as an adult, convicted of murder, and sent away until he was 21. His teenage years were spent inside prison walls. That conviction branded him forever. To his critics, it proves he has no moral ground to stand on. To Charleston, it is the very fuel of his mission today, the fire behind every raw, unfiltered word. After his release, he tried to reinvent himself, but the shadow of his past was always close behind. He became a community activist, even founding the Hypocrisy Over Politics Hope program, an organization designed to pull kids away from gangs and crime. For a while, it looked like Charleston might be writing the story of redemption, a man who could take his painful past and turn it into a warning for the next generation. But Charleston White was never built for quiet redemption. His personality was too loud, his energy too raw, his need to provoke too irresistible. Inevitably, he was pulled back into the spotlight, not as a saint but as a firebrand. By the 2020s, Charleston was infamous, a man who blended brutal honesty with a taste for public chaos. He called out rappers, politicians, even entire communities, tossing names like T.I. and Boozy Badaz into the fire, using their reputations as fuel for his own viral commentary. He didn't just critique, he cut deep, mocking their families, their parenting, their legacies. Every insult caught attention, every feud brought him more followers. And each time, people were left asking the same thing: was Charleston White exposing truths no one else dared to say, or was he simply chasing clout at any cost? Take his feud with streamer Adin Ross in 2023. During a livestream, Charleston pepper-sprayed one of Ross's associates on camera. Chaos erupted instantly, and legal threats weren't far behind. That moment summed him up perfectly: volatile, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. In another infamous scene, he waved stacks of cash at hecklers during a comedy show, taunting instead of diffusing. To some, it was comedy. To others, proof that Charleston wasn't a reformed activist but a showman addicted to outrage. That duality became his brand. One moment, Charleston condemned gang culture and preached accountability. The next, he mocked victims, laughed at death, and cursed out grieving families. In September 2025, after conservative commentator Charlie Kirk's death, Charleston dismissed it as white-on-white crime and laughed it off. It was shocking, offensive, and perfectly on brand. That was the paradox: part social critic, part troll, and all chaos. So when Charleston White spoke, people tuned in for one of two reasons. They either believed he was delivering hard truths no one else would say, or they were waiting for him to contradict himself and implode. Either way, his words carried, which is exactly why, when he turned his spotlight onto David's case, it mattered. Charleston's voice doesn't echo in a corner, it thunders at the center of controversy. And this time his target wasn't a rival rapper or a politician, it was the system itself, and the bold claim that David was innocent. By the time Charleston stepped into David's saga, his reputation was already a patchwork of scandals, hot takes, and viral explosions. He wasn't some outsider suddenly weighing in, he was already a storm, and his entry into the case added thunder to an already chaotic downpour. In early 2024, he mocked the tragic deaths of Chicago rapper King Von and Houston's Takeoff, dismissing their legacies with a smirk, clips spreading like wildfire. For many, that was the breaking point, the moment Charleston stopped being a reformed activist and became a professional antagonist. His feud with Boosie Badazz pushed things even further. Charleston didn't just attack Boosie's music, he targeted his family, accusing him of being a terrible father leading his kids down the same path of crime he once walked. When Boosie fired back, Charleston escalated with threats that blurred the line between dark comedy and real menace. To Charleston, it was just keeping it real. To his critics, it was harassment. Even law enforcement wasn't safe. He mocked police chiefs, ridiculed entire departments, and once even claimed he would shoot any cop who tried him. The contradictions piled high. Here was a man who spoke against gang violence yet glorified confrontation and armed defiance in the same breath. And still, Charleston thrived in the chaos. Every insult, every feud, every outrageous statement made him bigger. By 2025, he wasn't just an activist, he was a one-man media circus, brandishing guns on Instagram Live, clowning rappers in interviews, spinning every controversy into fuel for his brand. So when he defended David, critics dismissed it as another stunt. They said he wasn't seeking truth, he was chasing clout. But here's the paradox that made Charleston's defense impossible to ignore. The louder people accused him of clout chasing, the more attention his words drew. His defense of David wasn't whispered in small rooms, it was blasted across YouTube, TikTok, and X, consumed, debated, and dissected by millions. And whether people thought he was a fearless truth-teller or a reckless provocateur, Charleston White had once again positioned himself exactly where he thrived, in the eye of the storm.
Nothing else put him in jail just to put a hole on him.
A dead body found in your
If
car?
nothing, listen, hold on. If they find a dead body in me and your car, and this is our car, do you think they'll let me and you stay out like long?
The strangest part wasn't just how Charleston White inserted himself into the David case, it was how quickly his words began to shape the very air around it. Investigators tried to move quietly, building a case brick by brick, but Charleston was out there tearing down walls with a megaphone. Every time officials said no arrests at this time, Charleston framed it as proof of innocence. Every silence became suspicious, every delay became a conspiracy, and the internet ate it up. But behind the viral soundbites and hashtags, there was a dangerous tension forming. Charleston wasn't a lawyer, he wasn't a detective, and he certainly wasn't bound by the weight of evidence. He was a provocateur who thrived in chaos, and by aligning himself with David, he had turned a murder investigation into a cultural battleground. For grieving families, it was a nightmare. For David's fans, it was hope. For Charleston, it was fuel, another storm where his voice roared loudest. And so the case teetered on a knife's edge, not because of new evidence, not because of a surprise arrest, but because Charleston White had managed to do what few ever could, make himself inseparable from the story itself. At that point, the question wasn't just whether David was guilty or innocent, it was whether Charleston's voice had become too loud for the truth to be heard at all.
Why would they let him walk this freely, only to lose endorsements and sponsorships and cancel shows and not his freedom? In the climate that we're in.
It was a question no one seemed able to answer clearly, and that silence, mixed with Charleston's relentless commentary, kept bending public opinion day after day. What began as a murder investigation had morphed into a cultural storm about race, justice, fame, and who really gets to decide guilt in the age of viral content. And at the center of it all wasn't a police chief or a prosecutor, it was Charleston White. As weeks turned into months, the David case became bigger than a single crime. It became a mirror reflecting how society consumes scandal, celebrity, and controversy in real time. Charleston's voice grew louder than the police, bolder than the lawyers, and more viral than the journalists trying to stick to the facts. Detectives still moved quietly in the background, gathering evidence and chasing digital trails across state lines. But Charleston gave David's fans something the authorities could not: hope. In a moment when the world seemed ready to bury their idol, Charleston gave them permission to keep believing. His arguments, flawed or not, became a script his supporters could push back with. And in the online era, sometimes the story matters more than the truth. Brands, fans, media, all found themselves trapped in the waiting game, waiting for a charge, waiting for an arrest, waiting for an arrest, waiting for clarity. And in that waiting, Charleston thrived. Because the longer nothing happened, the stronger his words sounded. The case isn't closed, the truth isn't fully known, but the impact is undeniable. Charleston White didn't just insert himself into this story, he rewrote its rhythm. He made David's innocence a headline as loud as the crime itself. He turned speculation into debate, debate into content, and content into influence. For David, the consequences are still unfolding. His career hangs suspended between loyalty and doubt. For law enforcement, the stakes are higher than ever. One wrong move, and Charleston's words will echo louder than their verdict. And for the public, the David case stands as a reminder of just how easily truth can be tangled in clicks, clips, and commentary. What are your thoughts on Charleston White's revelations about D4vd? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to check the cards on screen for more.